Russia is suspending its last major nuclear disarmament treaty with the United States. President Vladimir Putin announced the move during an address to the nation. The New START treaty commits Russia and the United States to limiting their stockpile of nuclear warheads. It came into force in 2011 and was due to expire in 2026. Putin also warned Washington that if the U.S. resumes nuclear tests, Russia will do the same. His audience of lawmakers greeted the statement with applause.
I repeat, Russia is not withdrawing from the treaty. No, it is suspending its participation. But before returning to the discussion of this issue, we should understand for ourselves what such countries of the North Atlantic Treaty Alliance like France and Great Britain claim, and how we will take into account their strategic arsenals, that is, the alliance's combined strike potential.
Earlier, our correspondent Yuri Reshetto in Riga told me what Russia's suspension of the New START treaty means.
Well, the purpose of this treaty, Claire, is to reduce nuclear weapons. It's the only remaining element of the nuclear arms control treaty system between the United States and Russia. And the two countries hold together about 90% of the world's nuclear warheads, which is pretty much. So we should be pretty worried about this suspension. The treaty provides for mutual inspections on nuclear facilities on each other's territory, so that each side can make sure that the other side doesn't deploy more nuclear warheads than agreed. A month ago, the United States already accused Russia of refusing to assist the US in those inspections. Moscow threatened to withdraw from the treaty in 2026 completely, and now this suspension comes. Putin explained the step by saying that the United States would be developing allegedly new types of nuclear weapons, and Russia should be ready to conduct nuclear tests.
Now, tell us, Yuri, more broadly about Putin's speech. This is his annual State of the Union, but obviously this year taking place under exceptional circumstances. What were some of the other major themes?
Well, the more arms Western Ukraine is supplied by the West, he said, the further Russia would push those arms back away from the Russian border. That was probably an indication that Russia might try to annex more Ukrainian territories in his speech. And in any case, this was a warning to Ukraine and a warning to the West, first of all to the United States. By the way, just an hour after Putin's speech, the Russian Foreign Ministry summoned US ambassador to Moscow and expressed a diplomatic protest because of the growing involvement of the United States in the hostilities on the side of Ukraine. It's said in a statement. Basically, it's the old Russian way to reverse all accusations made against Russia and to accuse the West of the same. And Putin's speech was an attempt to convince the world that the danger doesn't come from Russia, but from the West for Russia.
Now, he is speaking to a domestic audience there. What kind of support does he have almost a year since Russia's invasion of Ukraine?
Well, look, maybe most people in Russia have long since given up the attitude to protest. Most say it doesn't matter what's happening in Ukraine, what's going on there, unless the mobilization affects them personally. Vladimir Putin knows that, and that's why the second part of his speech, the larger one, was about the social policy of his government. Also, he said that presidential elections will be held in 2024, so next year, in accordance with the Russian law. So it's his speech today earlier, the Russian president clearly wanted to be seen not only as the president of war, but rather as the president of peace, which is logical if you keep in mind he's ambitious to run for the presidency next year one more time.
Well, thank you so much for that update. That's DW's Yuri Reshetto in Riga, Latvia. Really appreciate it. Well, NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg is urging Russia to reconsider suspending its participation in the New START treaty. Stoltenberg has been meeting Ukraine's Foreign Minister, Dmytro Kuleba, and the EU Foreign Policy Chief, Josep Borrell, at NATO headquarters in Brussels. And Stoltenberg gave a stark warning over the possible consequences of the Kremlin's move.
More nuclear weapons and less arms control makes the world more dangerous. And that's the reason why in NATO we have worked so hard to engage Russia on issues related to arms control, and why NATO allies have supported the New START. and also why I'm calling on Russia today to reconsider its decision to suspend its participation in the new START agreement. We have to remember that this is one of the last major arms control agreements we have. After Russia started to violate the agreement that banned all the intermediate range weapons, the INF Treaty, that led to the demise of that treaty a few years ago. Now they are suspending the other big nuclear arms control treaty, the new START, which regulates, put limits on the total number of long-range strategic weapons.
I'm now very pleased to welcome John J. Sullivan. Until last September, he served as U.S. ambassador to Russia and was previously U.S. Deputy Secretary of State. Welcome, sir. Thank you so much for taking the time to speak with us. We had this major announcement in that speech that Putin is suspending Russia's participation in the new START treaty. In your view, how worried should we be here?
Well, thank you, Claire. It's great to be with you. This is a regrettable and irresponsible move by the Russian government, but it's something that they'd already signaled. They had already, in effect, suspended participating in the treaty some time ago by declining requests that the U.S. made for inspections, which the United States is entitled to have under the treaty. It's not something that Russia gives us. It's something we're entitled to under the treaty. They've also refused to meet in this group called a bilateral consultative group established by the treaty, where both sides are supposed to talk about issues under the treaty. They've declined to allow inspections or to meet and discuss the treaty. They had already suspended participation. What I think significant, Claire, is Putin went further than that. He said he wants to know what Great Britain and France are doing before he resumes participation in the treaty. This is a signal that he is going to withdraw, in my opinion, because this new START treaty is a treaty between the United States and Russia. Only
is this the
countries.
End of an era for arms control in that sense?
Potentially, it's what he's signaling. And why is he signaling this? Because his war in Ukraine is going so disastrously wrong for him. This is more nuclear blackmail, nuclear saber rattling by the Russian government, by President Putin. He's done it before. He's not taking the final step now in withdrawing from the treaty, but he's signaling that he's going to do it.
Now, Blinken has left the door open to restarting negotiations at any time. Do you think there's anything the U.S. could have done differently to keep this treaty alive, or is this a reason for the U.S. to change its nuclear posture?
Well, Claire, we've been engaged with the Russians to try to get this treaty reinvigorated, to get inspections underway, to meet in the treaty established process to discuss issues that may arise under the treaty. And the Russians have simply refused. And their excuse has nothing to do with the treaty itself. What the deputy foreign minister said some weeks ago was, because the United States is so hostile to Russia in connection with Ukraine, Russia isn't going to participate in the New START treaty. Well, what does that say about their attitude? Even at the depths of the Cold War, the United States and the Soviet Union continued to have discussions on arms control agreements. What Putin's saying now is, given what's happened in Ukraine to my special military operation, if this continues to go downhill, the New START treaty and maybe others, other actions by me are going to be coming.
Now, you stayed in Moscow after the invasion of Ukraine and all the way up until September 2022. What changes did you observe in Russian society since the invasion of Ukraine?
Well, there was a certain amount of fatalism among the Russians that I engaged with. Many were afraid to discuss their true feelings about what was happening because the Russian government has been engaged in an enormous crackdown on independent media, NGOs, and so forth. I think a lot of people are afraid to speak their minds. But Claire, I'm afraid to say there are a lot of Russians who, over years, being fed Russian disinformation, are prepared to believe the absolutely untrue statements by Putin today that somehow the war that he launched in Ukraine was actually a war launched by the United States and our allies and partners. I mean, it turns truth on its head. It would make George Orwell blush. The types of misstatements that he's making. But unfortunately, the Russian government has been engaged in a disinformation campaign directed at its own people, such that they are prepared to believe. Many Russians are prepared to believe the untruths that President Putin is speaking today.
Now, I also want to ask you, as we look at the prospect of a grinding war of attrition in Ukraine, what is your view on how and when negotiations between Ukraine and Russia might be possible? Is there a scenario in which they could be productive?
Claire, given my experience before the war started, my involvement with the U.S. government and our efforts to negotiate with the Russians to stop the war before it started, I can tell you from my experience and all I've seen since it began, the Russian government has no interest in good faith negotiations with anyone over Ukraine. President Putin is dead set on achieving the goals of his special military operation. He doesn't want an off-ramp. He doesn't want good faith negotiations. He wants surrender by Ukraine, which is what they say would be the cost of negotiations. So I don't see a willing interlocutor on the other side, Claire, who would engage in negotiations at this point, only when Putin thought that he could not achieve the goals of the special military operation, which are, where they repeat it very often, to denazify and demilitarize Ukraine, which I interpret as removing the democratically elected government in Kyiv and subjugating the people of Ukraine. Only when he really believes he can't accomplish that would he engage in negotiations. And he believes he can accomplish those goals today.
Thank you, sir, so much for sharing your insight. I'm afraid we're running out of time and have to leave it there, but I want to thank you again for taking the time to speak with us on DW News with former U.S. Ambassador to Russia, John J. Sullivan.